So we should point out on these battles, they're deterministic, where you have to run to intercept the attacking army soldier or group, and save the citizen. And the more citizens you save, the better your reward at the end. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of an interesting twist. It's not just, wave after wave of soldiers that you fight. You have to go seek them out and be quick about it.
And there's more tied into this as well, right? Mandrew could have visited Necht and talked with one of the soldiers there, convinced him to not participate in this battle, and there'd be one fewer, people to fight. He could have gone to the thief's hideout in Rockwood and interacted with one of the thieves there in such a way that, kind of compelled them to join the Mercenaries Guild and help out on this battle. And then there's one more way you can interact. Mandrew, what's the third way?
So you covered the Necht militia member that you can convince to stay home. Yeah. You covered the anxious bandit. Yeah. Then there's the refreshed mercenary who, if you defeat all 4 Mercenaries Guild targets before you do this. So that's what's difficult.
So that's 3, kind of like side little stories that you can get involved with that affect this battle. But then as you go through this battle, if you don't save everyone, then there's tombstones in town for those people with messages about who those people were, and they're absent from this town. If the shopkeeper was killed, you can no longer go to that shop. So we try to make it significant beyond just whether you can get through this battle or not, but the effect it has on the town and the people and the other people in the surrounding towns that could have helped you or interacted with this battle.
Mm-hmm. So, and they do actually come up in a later event, but I don't want to say more because I don't want to spoil it, depending on how many you save.
Yep.
Also, as a side note, 2 interesting things about this town, from my point of view, are back when I was a tester, because I became a tester before I actually requested to join the team, I suggested that the darkness gets slowly lighter as dawn approaches and the number of battles increases.
Yeah, that was brilliant.
That was really good.
Yeah, I was very proud of that at the time. And one thing I was less proud of is when I broke event placement after saves, and to save all the townspeople, you could just save your game and reload, and the soldiers would be right back where they started. Oops. That's fixed now, I'm mostly sure.
Yeah.
That's good. That is another example of something that takes just living in the world for a while to kind of, build in those kind of slow changes that some players will recognize, but not all. But, the level of detail that's difficult to build in right when you're designing the game.
It's also worth noting the difficulty scaling in this particular type of event is, the enemy's attributes are not only increased, but they actually move faster when they're moving towards the town people if you're playing on Legendary versus very, very easy.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Of course, I always play on Legendary, that's why.
Yeah, me too. So I've never seen them move slowly. It's just a rumor I've heard.
Yeah, that's why my son was able to actually complete it on very easy. Oh no.
Yeah, I quite like It's very hard with these events, right, from an RPG design point of view, because you're introducing a slightly different mechanic. You want this to be fun the second time through the game too. Right, and so it's a very tricky thing to get. You're really balancing the player's mood and expectations. And I think this is just fun enough and just challenging enough, and there's enough ways to knock out some of the fights through stuff you would probably be doing anyway, that this achieves that level of balance. And plus you get good rewards if you save more townspeople.
Absolutely.
Right. I mean, if we could just be absurd with this game, as you guys know, I would want to spend another year with this, building in even more connections, even more interrelationships. Things that you do here have an effect on far off towns. You get to a game experience where almost no one sees or encounters everything in the game, but they're all getting this very immersive experience.
That would be ideal, but
sorry.
Yeah.
I was gonna say we are, I think, trying to be a little more down that path for Livestream too.
No, we really are. I mean, really, I'm talking about myself as like a sickness because I don't know when to stop. Right?
Yes.
I mean, it's important that you have people who say, okay, we need to release this. If we are just endlessly iterating and making it better, then we get to the point where no one actually ever gets to play the game.
So that's why Seth and I have to be the bad guy and say that.
Yes, it's an important role.
Yes, ship it yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I just quietly seethe with rage every time we delay it a little bit further.
Sure, and then we find Typo McTypo Face.
Oh my gosh. That's a great NPC name. I really do want us to put in an NPC somewhere who's called Typo McTypo Face.
A tester,
room.
not even a tester, a streamer who had an early access key today found an NPC with like 6 typos in their 4 dialogue boxes. It was amazing, and we'd gone through a lot of effort to comb over these dialogues.
It's painful. And it wasn't even a hard look. He only was reading half the text and he just casually, found these errors.
He's like, oh, here's another one. And oh, look at that one.
It's like, wow. It's like,
I think we should put an entry in that in like the developer's room.
That is my suggestion. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that guy should be not the streamer, of course. The NPC should be quite.
Yeah, agreed.
Yes. All right, so speaking of infinite funds and things we would do if we could do whatever we wanted, Mark, Chris, what are the things that, if we had endless money to throw at this game, that you would want to put into it?
We also have endless time.
Okay, endless time too, sure.
Yeah. Endless time and endless funds. 100% custom art, obviously.
Yep.
I would love to hire somebody who could perfectly recreate perhaps a mixture of Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger art, which would be pretty expensive.
There was some amazing
my turn.
work in those games.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And Mandrew was talking about Ghibli Studios art. For video games is also amazing. And I completely agree with that, but it is a little bit different than ours.
Yeah.
So, but there's also a risk, right? Because part of what we're selling is nostalgia. And so people who come to this game are expecting a certain kind of look, I think, to have that classic RPG feel. I mean, we can create all custom art, but it has to be close enough to this kind of childhood experience, right, for people to get that feeling that Seth was talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Kind of. I would slightly disagree on that, though. There's this concept called in service to the brand, where you kind of it's brought up with the new BioShock game, where you kind of like, okay, what makes a BioShock game? Oh, stealing stuff from things as you go by, doing this, having magic, and you end up with something that kind of misses. It gets all the check marks, but it doesn't get like the core, and so it doesn't work in BioShock because you're stealing, but you're in a town this time, and that doesn't make any sense. People don't allow that, and magic doesn't make sense. It's shoehorned in, and that's why I gave the example with Derek Yu and Spelunky is. I think if we did actually release a game that had the, a change in artwork or a change in combat system or just a fundamental change, but it was true to the kind of like the feel of what makes a game a Livestream game, I think people would accept it. You see the counterexamples because they're painful. You see the second Final Fantasy and it doesn't get it. You see the second Zelda, it doesn't get it. You see... and I'll go back to the latest Zelda, it looks nothing like modern Zeldas at all. Like, it's amazing, but it's so true to the core of what makes it a Zelda game, which is exploration and risk, that, like, it's, getting Best Game of All Time awards.
Yeah. All right, well, I like that, exploration and risk. What are the other core elements do you think of the Livestream series that we should always preserve?
Oh, that's a very good question.
I selfishly, no, I definitely think the ability to distribute how your characters actually level up, you know, the AP system, and the interplay of skills, you know, the fact that you know, if you use these sets of skills, or if you pick this party, this set of characters, then these are kind of the skills you're going to end up using more in general for this character class and that character class. But if you had a slightly different party, you would use a different set of skills, even for you know, the Grey Mage. Again, to harp on that point, but yeah, I mean that would be, you know, my core of what makes Livestream.
Okay, excellent. Mark?
Thought I already went.
Well, no. Sure. Well, is that a core element that you think all Livestream?
Absolutely. I completely agree with that, and I was, you know, reminded of Final Fantasy 1 and our, you know, previous tournaments, where you level up and you're like, yes, all 4 of my characters are leveling up, and they each get like 2 HP increase, because it's somewhat random in Livestream 1, and so, or sometimes you get, even my Black Mage got 25 HP on that level up. That was amazing. Whereas in here, it doesn't matter. You're like, I'm just going to give my Black Mage 25 HP, because that's, you know, he got hit so hard in that last battle. I'm just going to give him more. Why not? Or my Monk ran dry on MP most recently, so I'm just going to throw a ton of MP in him. So yeah, absolutely.
Who uses Monk skills? Oh my God. We've slightly amended and fixed that.
Exactly, yes. I now use many Monk skills. I don't just mash the button as we used to do.
Okay.
I should probably jump in and say that I don't want to say that we should go away from this art style. You know, we may decide this is absolutely what we want to do, and then it helps the game along. So I don't want to say, like, that change must happen.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But keeping the same art style and then hiring somebody who's very good at making that art. Yes.
Okay. Mandrew?
What's the core element? Yeah. Well, I'd say core element for me is the ability to pick your own party. You know, it's something that we, I think, all love from our Final Fantasy tournaments. And then carrying that on and making the character classes even more dynamic, more important, but actually balancing the classes. That's something that's core to me.
All right. And so I love this. Mark, the reason I was asking you to kind of repeat maybe, I guess, is because I'm kind of writing on this list, because I think this feels like the most important thing that's come out of this conversation. And it's something I want to have us all keep in mind, because we all came up with essentially different things, but I think we'd all agree with what everyone said. The piece that I would add is immersion. That's the thing that I want to preserve for every game, is to create all the detail, all the, you know, just feeling of the game. So we've got exploration and risk, interplay of skills, ability to specify your party, you know, leveling, the art style, and picking your own party, as well as immersion. I think those are all great answers. Is there anything more?
Wow, we're all answering at once.
So tough.
Well, it's interesting because
like, it's like a bridge, right? The keystone is usually obvious, and the other important but not keystones are, there's a lot of options. I think it's why we're all sifting through options in our head.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm looking at our Steam page to think about what we wrote down, because we're kind of circling around those core elements, but we cited, you know, other things like, you know, 70 hours of gameplay, basically, in World Unknown, you know, or in Livestream, it was, you know, 60 or whatever, you know, so kind of maybe a core element for us is that it's this massive game. We're not into creating 3-hour games. We're creating big, large games. Maybe that's part of the immersion.
I think when you have the ability to go through the world the way you want, you just kind of, like, that's an emergent property of the things that we've stated, right? We don't want to make a long game because then we just pad it with filler. We want to make a game that feels real and doesn't feel, and this is not to knock on other excellent games that do this, but doesn't feel like the developers are pointing you through it, and holding your hand and saying, well, gee, you got this wonderful mana shield, maybe you should use it in the next dungeon, this color effect was also my suggestion.
Great addition, by the way, Seth. Yeah,
yes.
Loved it.
Oh no. By the way, to know if your town is doomed, see if they have a free inn. If they do, it's going down.
Oh yes.
But yeah, so this kind of like I just completely derailed my train of thought.
Well, you're talking about emerging properties that come out of the core principles.
Yeah, I think like to us, what makes a game fun is not necessarily, this because you can really perfectly balance this tiny, 10 skills per character game, and it'll be great. You can tell a wonderful story with that. I'm not going to knock those games because I love them, but we like the you want to skip the first 10 skills? Whatever, go for it. It's like a little more towards, I guess, Elder Scrolls in a way, but in the fantasy setting that we all know and love. And it just, like, that will make a big game. You cannot make a small game with that premise.
True.
Yeah, it's hard to distinguish the things that people like about the game from the things that are the core. And that's why so many studios have such a hard time with this, right? How many Zelda games were copies of each other until you end up with a few amazing ones?
Yep.
We probably lost all our fans there. Anyway, sorry guys. All Zeldas are awesome.
Except
for the few that aren't.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, that's part of the discovery, right? You try something new, slightly different, and maybe it doesn't hit off, and that's going to be, especially in Livestream 2, there's, I would say, even more changes expected in terms of the battle system and those sorts of things, and hopefully we can mesh those together to be balanced, but most importantly, fun. Right.
Yeah. Well, I like it. It is making me rethink what we're advertising, because I think the core things we've mentioned, we want to maybe do a better job of communicating. We have focused on kind of the value adds that we have, which is the 240 tracked achievements, the 225 different music tracks, the hour of flashback cutscenes, and maybe a few other things like that. But I think part of what will make World Unknown successful is communicating our passion for these key elements that we weren't necessarily even thinking about, but because we love these types of games, as we designed them, they just kind of came about. They were the unrecognized core philosophy of what our team was trying to do. Mm-hmm. Everyone's like, that's
Earmuffs.
Yeah. Well, look, you could say, I think you could do one F-bomb and it's still PG-13. You drop it twice, and now it's R-rated.
You get more than two because we're longer than a standard feature-length movie.
Oh, there we go. All right. Well, watch for the second one.
Also, the two fairy, the dialogue of these two fairy people, the guy in the north and the guy in the south, especially considering the temperaments of those two continents, it's just a tiny detail that I love, because the guy in the north, which is the fairly tolerant continent, is like gruff and like, get over here. And the guy in the south, which is the kind of, bad-ish continent, is very friendly.
Yeah, I love that too.
I do like that. Yeah. I think any character any kind of personality we can add to the characters in the game are wins. It's hard to go wrong with character and personality.
Also, when we talk about, just so that people are clear, because I wouldn't want to confuse anyone on this. When we talk about like game design and what we consider good and bad games, the best part about games is that it's all open to interpretation. We all have our like awful games that we know are bad that we like, and so we'd never kind of like dig on games that people have a special fondness for. I'm trying to think of a game that I love that's just awful. Well, give me a little time on that one. But we talk about good design because we want to make a game that is generally well designed. But you can absolutely have fun with a game that is, has flaws in design or has a lot of bugs or something like this. And my example would probably be, it's not a bad game, but Lufia 2 has a ton of bugs.
Whoa, you're stepping on some...
It's an amazing game, regardless.
It is an amazing game, exactly. Well, so here's an example, right? The wind element in Lufia 2, there's no enemy strong or weak to it. It's an element that is non-elemental by nature of the world that it is in. And it doesn't matter because the brokenness in the combat and the balancing doesn't affect the enjoyment of the game. The puzzles really bring out the fun, the characters are a lot of fun to interact with, the combat is serviceable, even though it does have some dominant strategies. And so that's a game that I wouldn't, hold up in a design class as you should copy this game, but, I absolutely love. So, that's, maybe we can all go through and say games that we think are, have serious design problems, but we still enjoy.
I love, in the comment section here, I love Zelda 2. It's definitely one of my favorite games. I don't necessarily know if I would say it has a lot of design flaws, but most other people would say the whole game is a design flaw. But it's definitely one of my favorite games, to be quite honest.
Well, wouldn't it be so much better if it was called Xenon 6 or whatever? Just something other than Zelda? I feel like you call it Zelda, and it sets up this enormous mismatch between expectations and what the game is.
In reality, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have an excellent point.
Yeah. I enjoy it as well.
Yep. What about you, Chris? Any games that are broken but amazing?
I honestly can't think of... I tend to discard games quickly if if they're broken and they don't... I just, unfortunately, don't have a lot of time. I don't know. I guess one that I played for far too long, and it's still, so I loved Master of Orion 2. It was amazing, and then Master of Orion 3 came out, and I was, it's demonstrably not a good game, in my opinion, but I still play it, and played it back when it first came out, far too much, and so maybe a guilty.
I guess
pleasure is not quite the right word.
A follow-up for Chris. Which of the civilizations did you play?
1 through 6. So
one in particular had a lot of balance issues, right? The 4 to 5
that's a good point. But I played that back when I was 7 or something. Or maybe I was a little older than that. But so I probably didn't notice those as much, and then 2 was so spectacular that I hardly ever went back to 1, and 3 was, I guess 3 is a good example of a game that I enjoyed, but it definitely had its flaws in many ways.
Okay.
And then 4 is amazing, and I've made my own mods to flesh out some areas and parts of the timeline and tech tree and stuff. But yeah.
Yep.
All right.
And Patrick Stewart.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, one person didn't answer, I think.
Me. Or maybe Andrew.
Both.
Go for it, Josh.
Okay. Well, did anyone play a game called Nuclear War? That came out in the mid-'80s. Maybe a little too obscure.
Nope.
But it's a characteristic that a lot of games may have, which is that it's a bit too random, and it's possible to be the best imaginable person at this game, but you can still lose through just pure randomness. So I'd call that a pretty fatal flaw. But the game overcomes it just by being so compelling in the concept that is kind of like a political satire game, which I enjoy, I guess. So it's just fun to kind of interact with the game, and I guess the high stakes, nuclear war after all. But the randomness is just too heavy. So randomness is present in last stream series, but it's something that we try to manage such that it's randomness that's overcome with skill.
Yes, Andrew did not lose against the boulder due to randomness.
that was the one-eyed arachnid, not the.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, the
Cyclops
He would have
spider.
beaten the boulder had he tried it.
Yeah, right. Of course. I don't see. I feel like maybe you were too hard on randomness there, Josh.
Well, that's right. You're the king of randomness.
Yeah.
But I definitely agree that you don't want randomness to just take over. You want there to be skill.
Right.
But the outcomes can be different between each.
Absolutely.
So
But
you want
if you're
agency in the world, basically.
Yeah, you must have agency. That's right. And in fact, Seth, you were the first one for me to give voice to that concept. I didn't quite have the word for it or whatever. And now that you talked about player agency, for me, that's an easy thing to think about as I look at the various scenarios in World Unknown, as I think about what's the player agency here, how heavy is it here, where are we frustrating players by forcing them, into one thing or another. And I think one way that modern games can really fail is taking away player agency. They're showing you movies and you're going from point A to point B because the game is making you do that, and there's not a lot of agency there for you. And I think that's an essential concept. I'm adding that to our list.
I'd like to point out that Mandrew is about to come into a scenario that I personally love. He's about to walk into a town, which, if you're not paying attention in the game, you'd think, oh, here's a town. I can go rest at the inn. I'm pretty beat up right now. There's no need to save before I walk in there. But because of the situation that's happening in the world, he's about to be attacked. And this happens in games like Final Fantasy II, where you walk into a town and you're like, oh, I've been in this town a couple times. I need to go buy some potions. I'm badly hurt. I need to rest. You walk into town and suddenly you're like whisked away to some horrible castle because you're captured. But if you pay attention to dialogue that's going throughout the game, you realize that's probably going to happen. And in this exact case, like, you just killed a whole bunch of court soldiers, so you should expect a battle. And I kind of like that concept, and I don't think it's used nearly enough in any other games, well, very few other games, really, where you can't just expect every single town to be a safe haven. This is a bad town.
That's a really great point.
The risk, yeah.
Yeah.
The world is not safe.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so why is my secret key in this town?
What?
Development key, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah. That's just It's just random.
Clearly it's random, but with some element of skill.
I can't remember where mine was, but I was like, I don't think that has anything to do with me, but this town sucks.
Why do we have so many sucky towns?
I don't know. Somebody should talk to the guys.
I think that's the problem.
Getting back to agency very briefly, the mysterious tactical section we keep hinting about had a major rewrite late into development because we realized, we kind of were getting at it, but a tester really brought it to our attention, that the player didn't really have agency in this supposedly awesome scenario, and that bothered us enough that we didn't entirely redo it, but in the end it basically looks so different now and plays very different now, and you have a lot more control and strategy. If we had infinite time, I would go over that and do that a million times.
Yeah.
Because although I'm very, very happy with how it has come out, and I think it works, I want to kind of micromanage it to death.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, absolutely. That simple scenario, well, not simple, but that scenario could be a game in itself. Like a whole game of nothing but that, and I would enjoy it.
Right. Yeah, I agree. That scenario was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for the flattery. I think, as I told Andrew, I was hoping to write in artificial intelligence, but I had to settle for artificial intelligence. And it really worked well enough.
Yeah.
Yes, when I first kind of played it, I said to Andrew, man, it would be awesome to have the time to go in and really make, I mean, obviously not true AI, but some much more sophisticated AI on there, and maybe in future installments we will.
Yep.
So we never actually mentioned or have discussed the status effects. Maybe it'd be a good time, given that Andrew has one of the new status effects, Bleed,
Please.
One of my favorites.
on him. Yes, it's quite brutal.
Yes.
Take it away, Chris.
Oh, you want me to discuss them? So we have in the Last Dream World Unknown, we have the status effects from Last Dream, but we've also added several new ones. One is Bleed. There are different types of bleed, or I should say there are different potencies of bleed, where you lose a certain amount of HP percentage per turn, and they do stack. So if you have a 15% and a 20%, if one boss has two skills that do a different percent, that means you can get up to 35% in that instance. Or if different enemies have different ones. It's also something that is quite difficult to actually purify, to take away, to cure. And most of the new status effects are like that. So we've added, let's see, I'm going to forget many, but zombification, jinx, disease, and then we have bleed states, and then we have a whole host of less common ones that are non-curable and non-blockable. So there's a freeze or frozen status effect that if you've gone to the frozen tower, the boss there uses, and it freezes you for a couple of turns, and you can't. Just one of your characters, but you can't block it. You just, that character is not going to participate in the battle for 5 rounds. I believe that's universal across all the status effects.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's several of those non-blockable sleeps, stuns, paralysis. Kind of across the board. There's somewhere either boss or super the end of the Hunters Guild or whatever Mercenaries Guild targets that super bosses, if you will, that have these unblockable status effects that are quite brutal.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So I feel like that is a major improvement over Last Dream, as good as Last Dream was, because you now have really hyper-specific battles where you are forced to consider these new status effects that are occurring, and you have to respond to them. And so the diversity of battles is now much greater, because it's not just a matter of leveling and being able to have higher attack versus their defense or agility or whatever. It's a matter of understanding how they're approaching you and how you must respond. And I think because battles are something that you're encountering throughout the entire game and you're experiencing many times, that was a major improvement we made by vastly expanding the variety of experiences that the player will encounter.
Yes. Like, bleed is particularly brutal in some dungeons, in some areas. I mean, really throughout the game, it's pretty painful. But and so you can hunt out and find clotting rings, and they grant you, immunity, and that is, one way that you can work around these the various new status effects. And so that adds a new strategic element to a battle, or the power of a white mage and being able to purify these status effects in battle easily, or a thief to steal items, which will help you take these status effects away.
Right.
I will say though that the most I do quite like bleed, by the way. At first I didn't get it, and then I was in a battle where I got it. The most painful status effect is no longer in the game, which is a bug where enemies that steal your equipment would steal all of your passive buffs.
Yes.
Wow. Pretty brutal.
Players, we fixed that.
Yeah.
It seemed a bit unfair.
Yes.
Just a little bit.
It's punishing.
I kind of wanted to leave it in, but yeah, no.
Yeah. Turns out your characters are incredibly weak without all their passives.
Right.
Yep.
Piano.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I do love all the pianos scattered throughout the game that are playable.
Me too. So we have all these core elements we mentioned, but at some point, these kind of neat experiences become part of some kind of core that we're offering, right? As Mandra was just showing a bit earlier, you can approach the fire anywhere you might find it, and it has 7 or 8 different phrases that we wrote that kind of comment on the player's psychological state. And the same is true for water basins that you encounter to kind of cleanse off this bloody, filth that's not necessarily physical, but just this world that he's kind of having to fight through, or the mirror, and he's kind of reflecting back on his experiences or her experiences and musing on who the main character is now. So those are all really neat elements that I'm glad that we added to the game. The pianos are cool, but I think there's a bunch of that, and altogether it just creates these like unique discoveries. So maybe one of the core elements I want to add is this aspect of discovery.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to say that better, but just the fact that...
Definitely true. I don't know how to say it better either, but you're absolutely right.
I think, Mark, when you were talking about Final Fantasy VI, that must have been, some of, your childhood enjoyment. I know it was for me with Final Fantasy I, is just this broad world that almost felt infinite to me at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just navigating through, and every cell of the game felt like it offered something new, exciting. You didn't know what you were going to encounter. It was a world of discovery.
Oh yeah.
World of Discovery would be an excellent name for the expansion.
Yes. Another 3 years. Put
That's Livestream 2 World of Discovery expansion.
Yep.
on store shelves 2027.
Yeah. That's pretty conservative.
Yeah.
I do like how in Next, if you kill some people to get in, of course, and you can actually visit the town before that, and they don't like you, but they're not going to attack you. But once you get in, the people are generally either rude to you or occasionally sympathetic, but they're not like all picking fights because they're all just regular citizens, and they know roughly that you're going to leave them alone if they don't start anything. So just that whole get out of town please kind of feel, and also let me tell you about my worldviews because I think I'm awesome, is part of why I really like just this town, because it's a very unpleasant town. But you can't just have all these happy hamlets in your game. It just doesn't feel real.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So there's a balance and grittiness that I think we pursue and in our games, right? So one of the things that we've been commented on and maybe praised for is a certain level of naivete with the game. So there's opportunities that Mandra and I have discussed where there's a certain point in the game where you just see this field of dead bodies that is pretty core to what the game is building towards. And so I was suggesting to Mandra, we could add, people face down in puddles, and the puddles could be colored red, and you could have birds that were eating on the dead bodies. But it's like, okay, we can imagine these horrible things, but do we want to put it in the game? And the answer is no, we don't, because we're conveying a certain world that is something that anyone could play from an 8-year-old onward, and all the way up, of course, up to adults, and is designed for adults. But the grittiness, I think we feel, does not add to the game. We want the realism, the immersion, the sense of place, the strong feelings, the whole range of emotions. But the raw detail in your face, kind of gross outness or violence, doesn't seem like that's what this game is about.
Right. Absolutely.
So as a bit of a teaser, the event directly after this, if you purchase the game, is an event that is not terribly bloody, but can be extremely kind of emotionally investing because of what it's actually kind of asking of the player.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I'm glad it's not part of the demo.
Yeah.
Yes.